Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams. Daniel, good to see you.
How are you this morning, Dr. Paul?
I'm doing very well.
Good.
And good to be here trying to reveal the truth of what's going on in the world. But sometimes that's a big job.
Yes.
First is to find out what we really think and do our best to find out what the truth is and then delivering it. Because it seems like our government doesn't help us very often in revealing the truth. Sometimes they get involved in squelching the truth. And of course, we want to know what the truth is in particular, you know, about foreign policy and FISA courts and all these things. But I've always complained about it because I saw the responsibility of the government under the Constitution. The founders intended that the government would be there to protect our privacy. And that means that government would be open. But for some reason, I think it's been sort of turned on its head. We don't have much privacy, and they have all the secrecy. And it looks like right now we're not moving in the foreign policy area where we're going to have more openness with this new administration. But we do want to talk about, and we'll probably put up something to demonstrate this a little bit, the size of our empire. And we've used similar photographs like this and pictures. And that is, the estimate is that we're probably in over 80 countries. Some estimate over 100, depending on how many troops you have to say we have an occupation. But certainly 80 significant places where we have troops, and in 80 different countries. And it adds up to about 138,000 people, but many bases, and it really shows, you know, the extent of our occupation. And one of the problems has been is that we accept this, the American people accept it, and they cheer the military on. And when we win wars, even if we get involved in a more legitimate war to some degree, such as World War II, we never leave because the plan was to, you know, have this empire. And so once we go, we stay, even though other countries are involved to a much lesser degree of having bases in other countries for their national defense purposes. But we're everywhere, and we keep hearing stories about it and the blowback and what comes as a consequence. So this is not something that the American people should ignore. We've talked about it a lot, but there are a lot of costs, you know, whether it's money and personnel or whatever. But this is something that I know you've worked hard on in the Ron Paul Institute to get this information out, to try to get more people to talk about it. And we occasionally find an article that comes from a progressive, but we've been anxious to work more with the progressive on this viewpoint, but we haven't been real successful. We have a few people who will, but you know, there has been some articles that at least take the position that we can refer to, but I wish the coalition between those who consider themselves progressives and liberals, where we agree on foreign policy, as well as the conservatives and libertarians, because otherwise, you know, the people who define themselves as libertarians, there's not enough of us. But there's a lot of good constitutional conservatives that basically agree with this, and there are some decent, honest liberals that agree with it, and then there's the progressives. But it's a mixed bag. Once you throw that mix into the Congress, you can't sort things out because there's too many special interests involved.
Yeah, and this is an issue that we have talked about, but we noticed a pretty catchy article that was in the Anti-Media, which is a good alternative website. In fact, they had a great article about your tweet storm the other night that I sent over to you yesterday. It was very good, and they often have very good articles. And this was one of them. They talk about 1,000 U.S. bases, up to 1,000, maybe more U.S. bases in 80-plus countries. And you mentioned how many troops are stationed overseas permanently, 138,000 troops overseas. They also mentioned maintaining these foreign bases costs as much as $100 billion a year, just our bases overseas. And our bases and troops in war zones cost as much as $200 billion a year. So that's a lot of money. do you think they're keeping us safe?
Right, they worry about us making sure that we have strong trade policies and we can export things
Yeah.
and sell them there things. But mostly what we do is we manufacture dollars, and then we also have a military industry, and we do a lot of exporting. But of course, both of them lead to trouble because we get to print the dollars and we export the dollars, and that facilitates those individuals who want to undersell us. Then, of course, the special interests decide they want to sell these weapons, and they're involved. But what most people don't want to examine closely is how does that directly affect the middle class and the poor in this country, because right now the statistics look good, but it's a long way from a fair, reasonable distribution of wealth which would occur in a free market economy. We don't have that. The more that we do this and the more we have the Fed involved, the more that monies go to these, whether it's the military industrial complex or it goes into the banking system, and it just goes into the very wealthy, Wall Street, and it leads to trouble. So the foreign policy is a very important economic issue as well. But the big question is why is it that we can't get more support from the American people? Because we were disappointed with the speech, the other night, thinking that it was the opposite of what we're saying that got some of the loudest cheers. And we'd love to be able to participate in changing that attitude.
Yeah, and it's a good point. The middle class is getting ripped off because of these the massive military budgets. And what do they get in return? They get kind of a regurgitated false patriotism that somehow you have to cheer this essentially anti-American policy of occupying the rest of the world. You mentioned about weapon sales and how these bases and troops overseas help promote weapon sales. The State Department bragged just a couple of days ago that thanks to our new sanctions on Russia, we've been successful in canceling billions of dollars in Russian weapon sales across the world, So
Yeah.
it's like, okay,
we got the business.
We got the business. So that's the thing. Is this the purpose? The purpose is just to put our troops, for us to pay for our troops and diplomats overseas to be salesmen for the military-industrial complex?
This looked more specifically on one issue that demonstrates this big problem that we're talking about, and that has to do with Afghanistan. They're in the news. There's more violence there. 16 and a half years. We've had how many presidents? 3 presidents involved. And it continues, and it doesn't look like it's getting any better, but we did get some hints in the speech about what would happen. It wasn't very encouraging. It looks like the violence is increasing, the problems are there. Pakistan, which is supposed to be somebody that we can control and give them a lot of money and that sort of thing, they're sort of getting involved on the edges of Afghanistan. But the basic policy was hinted to by the president in his speech about how things are going to change. But my argument, and see if you agree with this, the more things change, the more they stay the same, is what I think is happening, and maybe getting worse.
Yeah, he said 3 things in the speech about Afghanistan. Number 1, he said the rules of engagement have changed for our troops over there. Not sure exactly what that means. He also says we're no longer going to be hamstrung, he didn't use that word, but hamstrung by artificial timelines and artificial time constraints. Okay, that's not reassuring because after 16 and a half years, what does that mean? And the third, what was the third that had to do with, so the timelines, the third is escaping now, but, we're not going to tell our enemies what we're going to do. But it seems like we're the enemies because, just saw a piece in the paper recently about how the regular reporting from this Inspector General of our actions in Afghanistan, they tried to suppress his latest report so that we couldn't see it. They said, we'll release it. What does it happen? What does it turn out? That the Taliban controls more territory than it ever has since the invasion. So no wonder they don't want to tell us, but I guess we're the enemy.
So maybe our country will change our policy and change it. But you mentioned about the rules of engagement. But you know what I suspect that means? And it's already been admitted. More authority on the line, let the generals make the decision, and actually it was claimed that the generals made the decision about dropping the biggest non-nuclear bomb ever in Afghanistan as a demonstration, of our power and might, and then a follow-up, of course, that we're going to build more nuclear weapons. But that I find, fearful. It sort of really challenges this principle of civilian control of military when you start talking about more secrecy, don't tell the American people, don't tell them what's going on, and giving more authority to people online in wars that have been undeclared, unconstitutional, that have participates in our bankruptcy, and is just more mischief. And this whole thing is we do it for national security. That is such a ripoff in an idea that it does, because it makes us less secure. And this, as far as I'm concerned, is one of the strongest motivation for people in that area of the world, the Middle East and almost anywhere, where they would like to kill us.
Yeah.
You know, because they have had family members. Thousands of people have died, in Afghanistan. How many? Many more thousands in Iraq. And then they think, well, oh no, well, they're enemy combatants. They're enemy combatants. What we need is a bigger Guantanamo.
Yeah.
We have to expand Guantanamo. And at the same time, I'm fearful that, first thing is, and this may be a little bit of paranoia, but I don't think our country has completely given up on torture, because it's just sort of the black holes where they do that. But this administration wants to expand and keep Guantanamo open and arrest anybody, any place as an enemy combatant without a trial. And then they wonder why the people might get annoyed with this. Yeah. So, but I understand that, and that invites people to say, well, you're not patriotic. All right, I'm addressing the people in this country. Why don't we as a people get annoyed with our government? We don't pretend that we're supposed to take care of everybody around the world and that we can work out all their border problems, all their internal affairs. But if we are a country and we're citizens of a country and we participate in the process, then we ought to say that we, the American people, ought to wake up and do something about it and assume some responsibility for it, because it just doesn't happen. And as bad as even the deep state is, and the political leaders and all, the story is that throughout history, most governments don't last and don't even get a lot of strength unless the people go along with it. You know, the worst dictators get in there by lying their way into it, and the people believe it, but the people generally go along with it, and then there's a lot of trouble, and they figure, oh, we have to have an overthrow. And I think we play on that a little bit. There's been a lot of problems over in the Middle East, and we encourage these overthrows, and look at us, because we'll come in here and take care of you, and the economics and the military-industrial complex has nothing to do with it. We're going to guide you and take care of you and spread Americanism and American goodness and take care of the world. I think it's an idea based on a fallacy. I don't think it can possibly work. Yeah. And I think there's a better idea around, to tell you the truth.
And this isn't just our opinion. Look at Libya after we fixed that country. Look at Syria after we tried to fix that country. And Afghanistan, which you mentioned, is it's going along. It's going to keep going. We just looked at a headline on CNN before we started the show. It was about the Taliban versus ISIS. ISIS had a big explosion in Kabul, big bombing in Kabul. So now the Taliban and the ISIS are at loggerheads fighting each other. We're fighting both of them, and it's round and round we go. But you mentioned the body count. In a 2015 report on the body count, the non-U.S. deaths in the war on terror are about 1.3 million people killed. Those can't all be enemy combatants. The total death of U.S., according to the Defense Department, in the war on terror is 6,930 American service members. So,
but it goes by the American people. And of course, that goes back to who controls the news that they get.
Yeah.
And we do hear a lot of bickering between the Republican station and the Democrat station, and they're supposed to be really arguing this, but I've tried to make this case often that on the big issues, they're very much together. They go together on the war, so there's no challenge. I think there is a challenge over power, and that's what goes on. But that's why, you know, I was always hopeful that the internet and independent sources like we participate in would reach a lot of people. And of course, you know, when it's an ideological struggle, you never know how many people you reach. We have several thousand, and some nights many thousands. People will hear what we're saying, but it's still, you know, numerically compared to the major media, it's minuscule. But we don't know, you know, how many people hear about us. And I'm always encouraged when I get letters and interviews overseas and say, you know, there are people out there that care about this. So that's why I was hoping for more, probably, but then we all of a sudden found out that we're not exactly totally free in our ability to send out information, because there are monitors and controls placed on how our show gets distributed.
Yeah.
So, but we have to do the best we can, firmly believing that an idea can't be stopped, that it can get out there. And even when there were no radios and TVs and internets, ideas did spread.
Yeah.
And that, of course, is what we hope to participate in. But of course, there's a difference between a good idea and a moral idea, and one that is bad and immoral.
That's true. And, you know, back to these bases, you know, we've talked a lot about Robert Pape. We had him speak at a lunch. He was a great speaker. But, you know, his thing is that it's the perception that your territory is being occupied by a foreign power that leads people, above all, that leads people to suicide terrorism. And so we have a map, you know, just to show U.S. bases overseas, and it gives you just a sample, just a flavor of how many bases there are. And, you know, this is funny. Even the neocons understand that our bases overseas provoke people. Remember the famous thing with Wolfowitz. He said our bases, our troops in Saudi Arabia he conceded were a prime recruiting technique used by bin Laden to get people to join Al-Qaeda. And it's not just Saudi Arabia where people feel this way. But we've done shows on Okinawa, on South Korea, and the real resentment toward these U.S. military bases over there. People don't like having these bases. Well, the elites like it because it's very profitable, but the average people don't like the feeling of being occupied by U.S. government.
Yeah, and this thing about Wolfowitz, I think it's very important, because that was brought up when I talked about blowback.
Yeah.
And it's been quoted, and I believe it's an accurate quote coming from bin Laden, that he said there's three main reasons that we're really hacked off at America. One was the constant bombing and killing of many, many hundreds of thousands of people, you know, in Iraq.
Yeah.
He said symbolically, and reality says that the Palestinians are being mistreated, and he sympathized with them. And then he was very specific, and that was the base in Saudi Arabia. What he didn't understand, and I don't think our policymakers understand it, whether it's right or wrong or good or bad, doesn't matter. But the people of that world, and especially Saudi Arabia and other Sunnis, you know, believe that is a holy land. And not just Saudi Arabia. They believe that whole peninsula is Holy Land. So the fact that we had the military troops on there and the military bases was really a big issue. And like you mentioned, guess what? Wolfowitz, immediately after 9/11,
Yeah.
not before 9/11, recognizing that what could happen, then he said, we better take the troops out, and they backed off, you know, on that. So that's a big issue, but that goes by. If they believe that was the problem, you know, well, they didn't change policies. They just continue to do this and looking for trouble.
Yeah, and you know, if you remember, a lot of people laughed at you, made fun of you. Oh, you know, Ron Paul's listening to bin Laden, you know. But then Wolfowitz confirms it in his talk, and so even the neocons confirm it. So we have all these troops, 1,000 bases overseas. These people are not protecting the United States of America. It's costing us hundreds of billions of dollars. We're doing our best to bring it to light, to show patriotic Americans this is not patriotism. This is crony capitalism, the military-industrial complex. I hope you keep subscribing to our channel on YouTube and getting your friends and family to do so as well.
Very good. And I would like to thank our audience for being with us today. And I think this issue is obviously very important. The whole idea of us being there causing trouble and there's blowback, I think, is very evident, but we don't change our ways. But there's something else that's a little bit more difficult for people to understand, and that is who gets the moral high ground. Now, our country and our leaders can convince a lot of people that we have the moral high ground, we have a monopoly over it, because we want to spread American ideas of freedom and liberty and free markets and prosperity. So that is our job, that we spread that, even if it takes a little bit of force to do so. So that is our job, and they believe that our military is defending our freedoms and our Constitution. How is it defending our liberties and our Constitution by fighting an undeclared illegal war? But the reason these countries that we go into, they say, well, there's a bad people there. So look at how they painted Saddam Hussein. No angel, there's no doubt about it. And there's not many angels in a lot of these countries. And there's a few non-angels in this country too. So what they're saying, but what do they have, what advantage do they have over us? And why are they inspired to even commit suicide terrorism? And it's this definition of who defends the homeland. When the homeland is attacked, people rally. Even the most disagreeable people conflicted in a country and in conflict, that'll bring them together. So even if there's some dissenters in a country like Iran and different places, boy, all they need to know is some foreigners come in, the Americans are coming, they come together. And that is what happened. They defend the homeland. And that's the way we would be. Think of the unity right after 9/11. We've been attacked, although not understanding what really was the problem. Everybody was together because we were attacked, and we would stand together. And that's the way it is. It's very hard to overcome, and they gain, whether justified or not, it doesn't matter. They justify that moral high ground over us pretending we have the moral high ground by using force and bombs and sanctions and all those weapons to try to punish people that end up doing nothing but punishing kids and starving children and perpetuating war, and punishing the American people with less liberty and, of course, less prosperity. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.